Okay, we're going to talk about what's going on with the Iran war. And I mentioned something at the end of one of the videos I made yesterday that I want to expand upon a little bit more about the the game of chicken, as I call it, that is being played right now between the Iranians and President Trump, and a couple other issues related to the war. And I want to frame this with a clip of Victor Davis Hanson. I'm going to pause the clip a couple times and talk about it. At the end of the clip, he also talks about J.D. Vance, and maybe we'll spend a couple minutes on that issue as well. So kind of like an update on a few things somewhat related to each other. All right, here we go. Let's start with Victor Davis Hanson. Here we are.
So, in news on Iran this week, I just wanted one thing, and it might not take you long to address, but there were leaks from the government that there was a depletion of our weaponry to fight Iran with. And then if you have anything, Trump is talking about there's a new deal with Iran in the works. I know your audience is thinking, yeah, that's not going to pan out, but if you have anything on that. And then also tales of JD and Bibi Netanyahu not getting along.
Well, to go first very quickly, people have been leaking that there are not enough Patriot missiles, for example, or Harpoon missiles, older ones, Tomahawk missiles, are not enough sensitive, the most sophisticated. We've heard there are not enough bunker busters. I don't know if any of this is true, but it's been leaking. And the problem why Trump is so angry is we have about 40 or 50% likely of our arsenal, which is too low. This has been going on for a long time. Obama cut the defense budget, Biden did, and we don't have enough stuff. But the problem that makes people angry we have enough to handle Iran. We don't have enough to handle Iran, give the Ukraine enough to protect Kiev, and then deter China from attacking Taiwan. So the more you say that and leak it, the more likely China might believe it and want to try. While we're engaged with Ukraine and Iran, they might want to try to see if they could go into Taiwan and we wouldn't have enough missiles.
Well, that also speaks to the possibility that China, rather than saying, hey, this is a good time to invade Taiwan, might simply want to prolong the hostilities between Iran and the United States to continue to deplete American resources and distract America. And in terms of the threat that the Chinese might see this as a good opportunity to attack Taiwan, I think it's even more likely that they're going to wait and see how this whole thing plays out. I think the Chinese are very carefully watching the American public and how opposed they are to military intervention abroad, and asking themselves the question, does that also translate to Taiwan? Because the Trump administration has done, and I spoke about this with Dr. Wormser yesterday. If you go to the Israel 365 news channel, there's a new conversation with me and Dr. David Wormser that was just posted yesterday, and he made a very interesting point that, Trump talking all the time about how well things are going and how, we don't really need the Strait, which is true. America doesn't really need the Strait for its oil. But, and we destroyed their nuclear, we obliterated it. It all, I understand why he does that, but it also doesn't really make the case to the American people. Why are we still there, and what are we doing, and what is the national interest? What is the long-term national interest? And I should also add in taking regime change off the table, which happened pretty quickly on the first day of the war. I've mentioned this many times. On the first day of the war, Trump was talking about regime change. He didn't state it as a military objective that must be achieved, but he talked about regime change in the speech that he gave on the opening night of the war. He talked about creating the conditions for the regime to fall and for the Iranian people to achieve their freedom. I even think that the message of bringing freedom to the Iranian people is something the American people could get behind. But since the administration is allergic to talking about regime change, but also talks about how we don't really need the straits and we've destroyed the nuclear. You have this combination of messages that actually makes it an even bigger question for Americans. Why are we there? And I think this speaks to the fact that the administration has not done a great job of selling the American people on the interest and what the U.S. interest is here. And this brings us back to Taiwan. Is the American people sufficiently knowledgeable to understand why Taiwan is a U.S. interest? It certainly is. And, I think the Chinese are watching very carefully. This doesn't contradict anything Victor Davis Hanson said, but I think the Chinese are watching very carefully to determine what is the U.S. resolve and, how far is the U.S. willing to go in a kinetic conflict.
That's the worry. The second thing about Trump and the Iran war, we've had 5 or 6 of these where he says the negotiations are going great, and then they break down, and then he hits them once or twice, and then they beg him to get back, and then everything's close to an agreement, but the Iranians don't tell the truth, and then he gets frustrated. And the problem with this is that on February 28th, we had 250 days before the midterms. So after 38 days of kinetic operations, we stopped. We stopped because about 90% of everything they had was destroyed. But we didn't know that they had these little mosquito boats hidden everywhere, and we didn't know to what degree they had drones and missiles hidden, and they had a lot. So when we kept saying we're destroying 90% of their air capacity as far as missiles and drones, we didn't know what the denominator was. We didn't know 90% of what? 10,000, 20,000? It could be a lot, 10%. And so they started threatening the Gulf. At that point, the Gulf freaked out, and they had wanted us to go in there and eliminate Iran. But now that they got hit, they didn't want to commit with their 600 aircraft and join us because they thought we wouldn't take them out completely.
That's such a key point. At the very beginning of the war, it was reported by the New York Times and others, but initially by the New York Times, that the Saudis had actually been pushing the United States to go for it and take down the Iranian regime, and the UAE was on board with that as well. They're certainly not there anymore. And I think that this goes back to what I said about regime change. When it looked like where Epic Fury and Roaring Lion on the Israeli side was going was the downfall of the regime. And that is what it looked like in the initial weeks of the war. Let's bring ourselves back there. It's not just that he's talking about the percentage of their military we destroyed, but it's much more the real critical piece, what really led the Iranian regime to panic and beg for a ceasefire initially, beg through the Pakistanis to get them to beg for a ceasefire at the time, was that the regime was being brought to the point of collapse. And the main thing that was bringing it there was what the Israelis were doing, knocking out the IRGC, knocking out regime targets, continuing with decapitation strikes. The decapitation strikes of the top leadership did not stop after the opening strikes on day one, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, being the most notable. It kept going. I remember specifically there was a very powerful person named Ali Larijani, who was one of the top people in the regime. He's who we'd be negotiating with now if he was alive. And the Israelis took him out a couple of weeks into the war. And the Israelis continued doing the things that it takes to actually bring down the regime. So ever since that ceasefire went into effect, all of that stuff has ended, and none of that has ever been brought back. Even with all of the strikes the Americans have carried out, they have not brought back those actions that will actually weaken the regime. As I've said many, many times, going after the IRGC, going after the besieged, creating the conditions on the ground where the people can come out to protest. Those are the things that were happening in the closing days and weeks before the ceasefire. So it wasn't just about percentage. It was about the fact that the regime was really on the verge of collapse. And so long as it looked like the Americans / Israelis were actually going to go for the full collapse of the regime, So the attitude of the Gulf states was, listen, if you're actually going to go the distance, then go for it and let's be done with them. But if you're not going to finish the job and you're not going to take out the regime, then we have to deal with them long term. And that's when they get skittish and they start looking of ways of saving the regime, because they, of propping it up, because they don't want to be all out adversaries of the regime right now. If when the dust settles on all of this and when Trump is out of office, the regime is still in power. They don't want to have to deal with that. So the Gulf states got more skittish about what the Americans were doing because the Americans showed a lack of resolve about bringing down the regime. That's what he's saying here.
So then people came to Trump, I guess, this week and said, you're out of time. We're only 90 days. If you're going to solve this, and you can't keep saying this because... So last week they dreamed up, we're just going to unload greatest military campaign in the air since World War II. We're going to bomb the duels, and they were. And then that panicked Iran, and they say now they're going to open the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think you can trust them, but the point is they got the message that now this was the last chance. So if they...
I don't think that assessment is correct. First of all, I don't think it panicked Iran when Trump threatened this massive attack. I think it panicked the Pakistanis. I think it panicked the Turks. I think it panicked the Qataris. I don't think it panicked Iran. They don't look to me like they're panicking. Maybe it did, but it doesn't look like it to me. I think they knew that as soon as they would say, oh, okay, well, we're willing to talk, we'll open the straits, I think they knew that would mean that Trump would back off, and they've been stringing him along. So I don't think it panicked. I don't think it panicked them. Like I've said many times, they're not interested in a deal at all. They're interested only in prolonging negotiations. I have a little bit more to say on this point because I think we're in an interesting game of chicken, which I'm going to describe in a minute. I think this is the main point I wanted to make in this video. We're getting up to it.
Break this. And I think they will. Trump will have no choice to have any credibility unless he continues with that program. And your third...
Yeah. Okay. So he's talking about how in order for Trump to retain his credibility, he's going to have to actually follow through. And this goes back to the China point. If Trump ends up kind of looking for an off-ramp, leaving the Iranian regime in power, allowing a situation where the Iranian regime can credibly declare, I wouldn't call it victory, they'll call it victory, but they could credibly say, we survived, we were resilient, we survived the American onslaught, they couldn't take us down. It will make America look weak. It'll weaken America all over the world. And you could hate this war as much as you want, but once you're in it, you got to finish the job. And this is the big problem right now. Now, with all of that, this clip of Victor Davis Hanson was before this Axios story dropped the other day, which I want to show you. Trump to Axios: we are low keying it with Iran. I mentioned this yesterday. This is from yesterday. President Trump signaled on Sunday that he's prepared to allow economic pressure on Iran to mount, as opposed to ordering new military offensive, even as the country continues to defy the U.S. He says, we're only semi-negotiating with them. We're just watching Iran with its huge inflation and the fact that they have no money. He stressed that Iran is in very bad shape economically and has no money to pay its troops. The U.S. naval blockade has exacerbated the Iranian regime's economic crisis, Trump said. At the same time, Trump said that with oil down slightly over $75 a barrel, U.S. consumers are feeling less pain from the war. It'll work out. It always works out. It's like a game of chess. Okay, let me give you my take on this. I talked about this a little bit yesterday. So you see in this interview with Axios, in this Axios piece, Trump is saying that, I'm content to just sort of like let the economic stuff do its job, meaning let's hold the blockade, let's hold the sanctions, let's hold the frozen assets, let's prevent, Iran can't really sell their oil. They're suffering financially. Yeah, they have some overland trade routes, but it's not enough to make up for what they're losing. And with every passing day, they're getting weaker and weaker and weaker and closer to collapse with their inflation and their economy a disaster. That's his point. And Trump, of course, also points to the price of oil. Now, on the Iranian side, Look at what they're emphasizing. This is from Iranian state media today, a couple hours ago. Iran's conditions for reopening the Strait of Hormuz push oil prices higher. This is a story about how what Iran has demanding now, because remember, Iran, we covered this yesterday, that Iran came back on Saturday and said that they have 6 demands for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. And they're not demands that America can match. And they include things like America committing to paying reparations for the war, which would be ridiculous. America's not going to pay them reparations, and removing American military assets from the region, and of course lifting the blockade and lifting the sanctions and unfreezing their assets. These are all the demands that they're making, right? They made these 6 demands, but look at what they're saying here. This is a story about how the very fact that they publicize these demands is causing a surge in oil prices, right? Uncertainty over the future of the Strait of Hormuz and continued regional tensions have pushed global energy markets higher. Oil prices resumed their upward trend on Monday. They even mentioned Trump, reversing the temporary decline in oil prices that followed the optimistic remarks by Trump and a drop towards $77 per barrel. Oil prices resumed their upward trend on Monday, today, August 10th, amid ongoing concerns over the reopening of the strategic waterway. According to market data, Brent crude, the international benchmark, rose 1.2% to 84.58 per barrel. Meanwhile, U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude increased by 1.1% to 79.28 per barrel. So this is about and then they bring up what the Houthis are doing. At the same time, recent attacks by Yemen's Houthi movement on Saudi energy infrastructure have further intensified concerns over the security of oil supply routes. Analysts have warned that simultaneous disruptions or risks affecting 2 major energy corridors, Strait of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb Strait, could further increase pressure on global oil supplies. CNN also pointed to a 34.6% rise in gasoline prices in the United States. Great. This is what they're emphasizing. They're emphasizing the fact that oil prices are moving up. You see, Trump in his interview is emphasizing the fact that oil prices are coming down. What we have here is the following game of chicken. And I talked about this yesterday, but I want to just make it clear. Both the Iranian regime and Trump and the Trump administration believe that time is working in their favor, but also are managing the risk involved with that. Let me explain what I mean. From the Iranian perspective, I believe that they have made the following calculation. While it's true that with every passing day of this blockade and their frozen assets and their inability to sell their oil and all of the economic hardship that is being placed on them by the Americans, by what the Secretary of the Treasury, Bessent, is doing, that with all of that, their economy is suffering. We all hear about the hundreds of millions of dollars they're losing every day. They are willing to absorb that because they believe, the calculation they've made is that they believe that they can still remain in power past the midterms. And that if they can remain in power past the midterms, it is better for them to drive a hard bargain, to not make a deal, to keep oil prices as high as possible, both through actual actions and through declarations. Like look at the story that I just showed you. They say the fact that we made these 6 demands caused a spike in oil prices. Like they're emphasizing that actions they're taking are causing spikes in oil prices, that oil prices are moving in the wrong direction for America. Because the worst thing they could do is make a deal, even if it means getting financial relief, getting the blockade lifted, getting their assets unfrozen. If they were to make a deal that would give them some breathing room financially, give them some cash, but the trade-off would be that the Straits of Hormuz would be open and oil prices would drop precipitously, that would give Trump a domestic political win. If Trump could turn around to the people and say, look, oil prices are back and, the Hormuz Straits are open, oil prices are down at a reasonable number. If Trump can do that, the Iranian regime looks at that and says, that's more damaging to us because of the possibility that Trump wins in the midterms and is strengthened and has more political capital for this, for whatever actions he's going to take against us in the future. We need to keep this war as unpopular as possible, make the pain as bad as possible for Trump so that in the midterms he gets hurt. That's a more important strategic goal than getting money. But it's a bit of a race against the clock, right? It's a race here that on the one hand, they want to drag things out because for the reasons I just mentioned about how it hurts Trump. And that's the main strategic goal they have right now is weaken Trump, make him into a lame duck or as close to it as possible. That's what they're trying to accomplish. The problem is that in trying to accomplish that, they're dragging things out and not making a deal, which means that they don't have financial relief. Okay, that's how time is both working for them and against them. Okay, and in balancing those two concerns, the longer it goes on, the more the financial pain is felt by the Iranians, the more they can't pay their people, and that destabilizes the regime. But if we can stay in power, if even with all of that pain, we can withstand it and keep oil prices as high as possible, make this as painful as possible, keep making a fool of Trump on the negotiating stage, and get this through to the midterms so that Trump doesn't have a political win, because we can't make a deal and give him a political win and allow him to do well in the midterms. That would be a disaster for the Iranians. They can't allow that. So if we can string them along and keep this going and keep oil prices high until the midterms and cause them to lose in the midterms, and we're still in power, that's the ultimate win, because we didn't lose power. The regime didn't fall, and we're now dealing with a weaker Trump. Maybe much weaker Trump after the midterms. We hurt him. That's the goal right now. Now let's go to the American side. The Americans also, they look at the time thing. On the one hand, you see what Trump just said in this Axios piece. What did Trump say here? What did he say? He said, we're low-keying it. We're only semi-negotiating with them. We're just watching Iran with its huge inflation and the fact that they have no money. Iran is in very bad shape economically, has no money to pay its troops. The U.S. naval blockade has exacerbated the Iranian regime's economic crisis. So what Trump is looking at, and then he says, oh, it'll work out. What Trump is looking at is saying, well, I don't even need to hit them with bombs. If we just keep this economic stranglehold on them, with every passing day they're getting weaker, eventually they're going to collapse. Meaning he sees time on his side from that perspective. On the other hand, time is also not on his side from the perspective of domestic politics and of the price of oil domestically and what that's going to do in the midterms coming up. So for both Trump and the Iranians, they look at this current situation being dragged out as both a possible advantage and a possible disadvantage. And then it's a question of what is more valuable. And this is where I think the Americans are not reading the Iranians correctly. J.D. Vance said the other day they're desperate to make a deal. Trump always says that. They're not. I don't believe they are. I think that there's a real risk for them in making a deal, in giving a win to Trump, in bringing down the price of oil, and if that means that Trump would win in the midterms, that strategically is far more damaging to them than anything that America could do to them, because they're not trying to bring down the regime. Once the Americans signaled that they're not trying to bring down the regime, once they called off the Israelis from doing the things that the Israelis were doing and have been very clear that they don't want to bring down the regime, and you can also see from their actions that they're not trying to bring down the regime. Once they did that, once the Americans signaled that was a big tell for the Iranians to be able to do play the games that they're playing right now. Let's watch a little bit more of, actually, we could stop this one here. We don't have to talk about J.D. Vance in this video. I'm going to leave that. Just one more point I'm going to make in this video, because the J.D. Vance stuff is a totally different topic. I just want to share this with you. This is from Tasnim, the IRGC news outlet. It's their this is where they put out their messaging. Iran links Hormuz reopening to end of U.S. blockade. And here they're being very clear. The spokesman for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, Bakai, said the Strait of Hormuz will not reopen as long as U.S. maintains its naval blockade against Iran, stressing that Washington must end and make amends for its destructive actions. Okay, so they're driving a harder and harder bargain. They're not moving in a more conciliatory direction. They're driving a harder and harder bargain with this, because I think it has to do with that game of chicken that I just described. Now, one last thing before we go. I want to make sure that you are signed up for the webinar. We have a very important webinar coming up this coming Sunday, a week from yesterday, August 16th, 2026, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. in Israel. Mamdani's New York City, a warning to America, incredible panel. Former mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, the brilliant young commentator and writer Shabbos Kestenbaum from PragerU, the great author Robert Spencer and founder of Jihad Watch, and Rabbi Daniel Schoenbach, who is a therapist and an activist in the New York area. He's also got a very successful YouTube channel. You should definitely be following him. And he's been at the forefront of the anti-Mamdani campaign and protests and demonstrations that have been going on in New York and working on behalf of the Jewish community there in Brooklyn. So he's going to be with us as well. It's going to be a very important conversation about Mamdani's New York. So make sure you're registered. If you can't make the time, don't worry about it. As when you're registered for the webinar, you will automatically get an email to your inbox right after the webinar airs, where you could watch the full thing on your own time. So you don't have to be available at that time to register for the webinar and be able to watch it. So go ahead and do that. You can click the link in the description of this video, or go to israel365.com/Mamdani, or you can scan the QR code that is on your screen right now. And those are all ways that you can register for this very important webinar. Anyway, that's my take on where we are right now on the Iran war. I think it's interesting. It's getting kind of dangerous for Trump because you could drop a comment. Let me know what you think in terms of this game of chicken. Who is time working more in favor of? I think the Iranians are really gaining from this because their calculation is stay in power. As long as we can still be in power after the midterms, we're better off keeping the price of oil high and harming Trump, because that will put us in a better strategic position at that time. They think long range. And I think that's where things are right now. All right. Thanks for watching. God bless.